interpreting the same thing differently. Different people interpreted the same thing differently depending on their age or social background they belong to. So, isn't it a vague way uh, uh, to read and to think about some social science to just interpret some text, because that can be done in many different ways by different people.
Yeah. So so that was that a question? This is what you've understood, right? That's what you're saying.
So, ma'am, how like hermeneutics is a very vital part in ISS, in spite of it being not very like universal. Not everyone interprets the same thing in same way. Then how can that same source be used as a motivation or inspiration to think about something?
Yeah. So so hermeneutics we can think of it as a method of, like you said, reading a text. And when I said text, we are then expanding the understanding of what is a text. Because the text could be the written word, it could be the way I'm behaving, it could be what I'm speaking. Any of that could be seen as a text. Now, as a method of interpretation, what does it entail? It entails the finding of deeper meaning or finding of certain essences in the text, right? Now, this method or this understanding of what is hermeneutics remains the same irrespective of what you're interpreting, right? So the method remains the same. Now, what we find through this method, what we find through a close reading. When I say close reading, so let me tell you, for instance, if I think about what happens in a hospital, right? How are patients treated in a hospital? If I were to do a hermeneutic reading of this, what am I going to look at? I'm going to look at if I see the care of patients, I'm going to look at the entire process of what happens from when a patient enters the hospital to when the patient leaves, right? Because that is the point where I can understand what care is. Now, in that, I will be looking at routine aspects of care. I will be looking at what happens when there is surgery. So there are different parts. So I can actually break it up into many different texts. Now, within that, what is the next thing I'm going to do? The next thing I'm going to do is to say that, okay, this is what I see the nurses do, right? Then I'll see, okay, there is a division. There is a nurse, there is a GT, there is a person who just does all the cleaning work. So there is a division of work. And all of this is responsible for the care of the patient. So for me now so the first step would be the detailed observation and the description so that I can present to you a text which has the possibility of being read in different ways. Now, when I start reading in different ways, what do I see? I see that there is I will possibly see that there is no element of care or understanding in the way that a patient is treated. I may see that. So I may read that from the text. Now, what will get me to read that from the text? Um, uh, um, the mechanical way in which nurses interact with patients, let's say, like if I so in some hospitals, in one hospital I may find that there is a mechanical way. Now you may find something else there. It doesn't invalidate what I have found. It just is another interpretation, and it adds to the depth of the data. It adds to the depth of that text, right? So when I say deeper meanings, and now what will happen then is also that what perspective am I looking at it from? Now, when I look at it from the nurse's perspective, then what will happen? I will say, okay, they are mechanic. Okay, she's doing it mechanically, or they're doing it mechanically because of this entire social context. The context of work for the nurse is like this. They're working like maybe they're working 14 hours a day, they're not being paid enough, there's, so there are problems in the families. So all of that context then comes into my interpretation of why a nurse does care work mechanically. Right? So now if I look at it from the nurse's point of view, I'm able to bring this in. When I say that I'm only going to understand care from the patient's point of view, I can have a totally different story altogether. Now, looking at it from the nurse's point of view doesn't invalidate the patient's point of view, doesn't invalidate this experience, right? So interpretive social science is about really trying to get to the heart of the experience of a particular phenomenon. So you see, it's very different from what we did in, let's say, Durkheim's study of suicide, because he's not interested in how individuals, whether families of the people who've committed suicide or the people themselves before the act, he's not interested in that experience at all, right? So he's interested in looking at the data, the objective data, and try and think of suicide as a social fact that is outside of the individual. And in interpretivism, we cannot separate the two. We cannot separate this phenomenon from the people who are participating in it, people who are inhabiting it, people who are living it on a day-to-day basis, right? So does that answer your question? Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Others? Questions, comments, disagreements? Okay. Should we move to the next slide? Yeah, I think we were done with this as well. We were on I think we were, we were here. Good evidence. What does good evidence look like? So what I had said is we were talking about the fluidity of facts. The fact, the idea that when you think about whatever is going on in a particular social scene, you know that these are embedded in particular meaning systems, and that meaning system is connected to a larger cultural context. Now, what happens, for instance, in a prison and in a hospital, right? Whatever happens in the prison and whatever happens in the hospital are embedded in the cultural context of these two spaces. Now, what is similar? Is there anything similar between the two? Anybody? Anybody other than Jahnavi?
There is management committee in both.
Okay,
someone who manages the
someone who manages the people within that space. Okay. What else? Let's think about the prison, the hospital, and IIT. Is there anything similar? Responses. Louder, please. Kuldeep.
There is always a group of people every day. Like,
Can't hear. Yeah, write it down. Can't be heard. It's okay to. Can you write it in the chat?
And we all suffer with stress.
Okay. So all of you have stressed. In IIT, you have stress. So is that a commonality in prison and hospital?
Some discipline and division of work can be one.
Right. So you see what we are doing now is we begin by talking about it in a manner that is experiential. And so I say, okay, stress, I say there's a management committee. And then you have, Janvi, who's trying to put it sociologically, because she's saying there's discipline and there's division of work. So you are bringing in now for you what now if I say, for instance, the discipline is tied in some senses to the stress, right? Because because you have a very rigid structure, it stresses you, right? There are people in groups. Yeah. So there is that within the organization, you have specific groups that are created, right? And so these are all now if you think about it, these three institutional spaces, the prison, the hospital, and the educational institution, are actually very, very different, right? They're you don't commonsensically, you don't think of them as similar at all. But if you go a little bit deeper, you will see that they all have rituals around entry and exit, right? So you admission, hospital admission, prison admission into prison. There are very sort of formal rituals which are associated with admission. And then there is exit, right? When you exit the institution, you have a convocation. When you enter, there is a way in which you're familiarized with the rules. I don't know whether you here in IIT, when you enter, what the process is like, whether you're actually running around and doing things. I mean, when there is physical class. So there are processes in place, and there is a similarity in the processes across these three institutions. So when I look at your subjective experience in each of these, then the meaning system, there is a meaning system in each of these. Some aspects of the meaning system are similar. So I could say that discipline and division of our discipline and division of labor are aspects that are similar. Certain aspects are dissimilar. For instance, the nature of freedoms that are allowed, they're very different. Yeah? Now, in that, you will see that the nature of freedoms that are allowed are similar in a hospital and a prison. Right? There is a very clear, one thing that is common to all three is that there is a very clear separation between those who govern and those who are governed. Right? So the authorities and the people for whom that institution is, there is a clear separation between them. So the facts within any space, any social space, or any social phenomenon have to be understood in the context of a particular meaning system. And that meaning system has to do with the culture. Now, when I say culture, again, there is an institutional culture. So when you're a student in IIT and versus when you're a student at Ashoka or DU, there are very different meaning systems. So I can't, while there may be certain similarities, there are also sort of very vast differences between them. Now, I had pointed out that so facts, when you think of facts, when we discussed facts under positivism, we said that facts could be discussed as things. But here, then we are saying that they're not neutral, they're not objective. In fact, they are contingent and context specific. So discipline as a fact is very different in these three institutions, right? It's context specific. It's embedded in a particular meaning system. Now, so to think of in the positivist kind of light, where we thought of facts as something that is unambiguous, as something that can be looked at and conclusions drawn, becomes a question that needs to be addressed, becomes an issue that how do people address these ambiguities of social life? How do they make meaning from these ambiguities in social life? So, I could, when I, going back to my example of the hospital, I could actually begin to ask, how do patients feel with this mechanical model of care that I see in hospitals, right? What do they experience? How do they assign meaning to their lives as patients, when they are when they experience this kind of care. Yeah. So what people do then is that they constantly make sense by by examining and trying to understand the cues from any social situation. So so you try to understand the cues, and then you try to assign meanings until you have a sense of what is going on, right? So you could so in a sense, it's like commonsensically we may say that it's like rationalizing a situation, right? So you begin to think, okay, this is why a certain thing is happening in a particular way. And what we do is that even in the simplest sort of acts, like I said, we look at these cues. So in a classroom situation, the simple act of somebody switching off, right? Now here I can't do that because you're switched off. For me, which is why I say that put on your cameras, because otherwise I know that I have a sense that, okay, people are switched off probably anyway. But in the classroom situation, when I see that people are switched off, that is a cue for me to do something else, right? That is a cue for me to address that issue. So in all social interactions, we have this sort of cue. You're having a conversation, you see that the person is sort of looking here and there, then you say, okay, this person's lost interest. You then either try to change the subject or you break the conversation. You say, okay, I don't need to carry on this conversation. So so these are the cues, and this is how, when I say the method is about observing and documenting these minor details. So again, to give you an example, if I were to, as a sociologist, study how decision making happens at the level of the panchayat, what I will do is I will go there and I'll try and see who are the people who speak, who sits next to whom, right? How is the seating organized? What kind of voice do people have within that group? So and this kind of, what is the process of interpretation that is going on as people engage with each other, in the decision making process, right? So so for so I can assign meaning, or I can understand what is going on only when I look at a particular gesture in a context. Yeah. So I mean, the context of holding out my hand in this way, sorry, the action of holding out my hand like this is irrelevant in this situation, in the situation of a virtual classroom, right? So if I'm doing that, just, not as a part of the lecture, but if I'm just doing that, you'll wonder what's going on. And you'll think that there is something in this context that is making me do that. The context that you cannot really see because of the way the camera is laid out and so on and so forth, right? But for instance, if I turn like this, then you know that I'm looking at something else that is going on there, right? So what we are doing is that it's, but if I'm in a physical classroom and if I'm turning my head, it's not odd to you, right? Because you can see what I'm doing. Here, when I'm turning this way, you have to assume that something must be going on in ma'am's room there, which is what she's looking at, right? So now at every point, imagine the detailing that goes on with us, with all of us, and for sociologists in interpretivism, it is this method that we want to capture, that we want to look at, that we want to examine, the mental processing that happens in order for social action to take place, and the meaning systems which are both individual as collective and collective. Yeah, so what I do in a virtual classroom, what I do in the physical classroom, how I engage with you. Again, they're different. They're about that context. It's context specific. So when if you see me outside and I stretch out my hand, it's not odd to you because you know that I'm stretching it out in order to shake your hand, right? But here, what I'm doing is I must put out my right hand. If I do this, then you wonder what I'm doing again. But I would do this if I'm meeting a friend, right? Where I'm just holding her hand and walking away. Let's say if I meet a friend and I could do this, but I wouldn't do this if I'm meeting a friend. That would again be odd, right? So it's again we know this how. For the sociologists, it's important to understand, interpretive sociologists, it's important to understand how do we know this and what is that meaning that we are making of a particular action. So, my earlier example then of the hospital, you can imagine that for every small activity, you will have that much data when you try to break it down in terms of the processing of every engagement, every speech act, every gesture. All of these will become important. So, so what we are doing then is that what I said in the last class, and we did talk about this a little bit, is the concept of bracketing, which is for the researcher, it's important to set aside the taken for granted assumptions about the scene. Now, it's important for the researcher to understand what those assumptions are and then set them aside. Now, why do we set them aside? We set them aside because we can only, the interpretive researcher believes that she can only fully or somewhat fully understand what is going on if she participates in that scene. So, so what we have is the notion of a participant observer. So as far as possible, we try to be a part of that social scene. So if I want to understand what is going on in the classroom experience of IIT students, I can only do so if I become a participant. If I walk across from the side of the lecture, the podium, to the side of where the seats are, and I sit there, and that's where So again, if you look at it, even as a visual experience, what does it mean to experience the classroom from the podium, and what does it mean to experience it from the I remember the initial, for instance, my initial years of teaching, where I realized very quickly that writing on the blackboard wasn't easy. Writing straight on the blackboard, writing in a way that, so now these are all things you learn as you go along, right? When you're younger, you think it's very easy. You kind of, you can do it easily. But actually, if you really had to write straight, you had to, make it legible. It isn't that easy. So I think that what we do in one of the methods for the researcher in interpretivism is to be able to bracket. Now, we bracket in order to be able to carry on a particular social scene. And it's not just the researcher who does it. We all do it. All of us need to put aside our taken for granted assumptions about a social scene in order to carry on that social scene. And when we don't do that, when we don't set aside the taken for granted assumptions, there is a disruption in the scene. I want to just give me 2 minutes. I want to share a short video with you. I'll just send it to Chanel. Shannon,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
sent you the video
Okay, ma'am, on Gmail.
on Gmail, yeah, because it,
Okay, I'll share it.
yeah. So what we were saying is that when you don't bracket these taken for granted assumptions, it will be difficult for us to carry on with any social scene. And I wanted to give you this example from oh, sorry, Shannon. I think I sent you the wrong one.
Yeah, it's the one with Ranbir.
Yeah, no, that's the one. But I mean, that's one of the ones. But one that I wanted to send you, I didn't send you. Anyway, I think I'll share it with you later on. But let me just describe it to you. So the clip that I wanted to share with you is a film. It's a film which is a couple of years old. It's called Tamasha. It's, if you can see it, it's great. It's with Ranbir Kapoor and Deepika. But the particular clip that is interesting for us in this context is that Ranbir Kapoor goes to a party, and he's, the film is interesting because it's about him sort of questioning himself all the time of his life, and and so on. But this particular scene where he goes to a party and he's in this mode of questioning, and there is somebody who asks him, how are you, right? Kaisa chal raha hai? And he launches into this tirade about how nothing is going well. He's just he's just lost his job and he's feeling like this, and the guy who asked him that, he's like, just let me go and let me be. And Ranbir Kapoor's like, I mean, you asked me how I am, and now you have to hear what I have to say. You can't just go. And so this creates a kind of conflict, and then it ends up with them coming to blows, and Ranbir is thrown out of the party, right? So you see where here, when somebody, in a party, when somebody asks you how are you, the response is, the assumption that we always have is that you have to respond. You either say like, okay, or you say, whatever, so has to be a flippant response to that question. Nobody is actually asking you, when they're asking you, how are you? Nobody actually wants to know the details of how you are, right? So even when you're meeting each other in the corridor, you just say, yeah, I'm good, and you walk away, right? But if you were to begin to, begin a conversation, you will realize that the person is then uncomfortable, because it's like, oh, okay, I just asked you just like that, So here the taken for granted assumption is that to this question, even though it's a deep question actually, and you must, you may feel that one must ask it only when one has the time to engage, but the norm is that we just have a sort of one word response and a smile. It's a way of saying hello. It's a way of saying hi. So now here, so what for the researcher, then it's important to learn what these taken for granted assumptions are. And once you learn them, you have to bracket them. You have to. So that's what we do all the time, is that, if somebody asks us, how are you? We don't ask, acha, kyun pooch rahi hai? Nahi poochte na. When somebody asks, how are you? We just give an answer and we move on. If you're having a conversation, the conversation may begin with, how are you? You say, yeah, and then you move on to other things. So we bracket this understanding in order for us to continue these conversations, continue this particular social scene. When we don't, when we begin to question it, then that social scene is disrupted, as had happened in this Ranbir Kapoor video. Okay. Yeah, can we have the slide, please? Yeah, so then now, so so bracketing then is really what will reveal what everyone knows, but people don't really say, right? What are the rules of the game? In a classroom situation, what are the rules of the game? That's what we want to arrive at. And sometimes you will know the rules of the game in its disruptions. So for instance, my main research was in a prison. And I discovered that, very often I would know what the rules are, not by asking people, because when I asked people, they would just, again, not give very clear answers. But I would know what the rules are from their disruptions, right? I would know what people did from the disruptions, and I would also know very clearly what the rules are from their disruptions. So bracketing then makes possible makes it possible to visualize the significant features of a social scene, and these features are the scaffold on which the actions are based. So when I was telling you trying to ask you what are the sort of commonalities between prison, hospital, and IIT, what I wanted, what we would, if we began to list, we would get to the scaffold, and you will see that that scaffold in some ways is similar across these institutions, and in several other ways they're different. So you could, I could think of a scaffold of social institutions generally, and I could of certain social institutions generally, and I could think of particular scaffolds of each of these institutions, right? So when we move into the next topic in our course, which is looking at some of these social institutions, I think this will this is something that we will be able to substantiate. Yes, next slide, please. So what is the next question that we ask of interpretive social science is, what is its relevance? And its relevance is really in terms of having an in-depth understanding of social worlds. And the idea is that this in-depth understanding is necessary for us in order to take any sort of a policy decision, in order to sort of take any decision which affects humanity, which affects the organization, and so on. So for us, gaining knowledge, for us in the sense of for interpretivism, gaining knowledge is a way of really bringing to light the subjective experiences of people. And so therefore, the relevance of interpretivism has this dual focus. One is humanistic and the other is practical. Why practical? Because unless you understand the subjective experiences, you cannot actually make rules, norms in a way that it helps, right? In a way that it helps all human beings. And it has a humanistic focus because, again, it may be part of it is, of course, knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge for also for this understanding of shared humanity, also for getting a sense of what this humanity is, and the understanding of differences, the understanding of multiple perspectives. Now here, I think one idea that is introduced, one idea that is introduced is the application of a transcendent perspective. Now, to transcend would mean to go beyond what is ordinary. To transcend would be to go beyond the ordinary subjective experience in order to. So you're not just, you're observing something, you're saying something about what you're observing. But that is not enough in interpretivism. We have to transcend what we observe to find these deeper level meanings, which are reflexive, which are, I think in the ethnomethodology part, I had introduced the idea of indexicality, that these gestures, these words, these actions, they always stand for something else. So when we know that, we also have to take this perspective that is transcendent, that tries to go beyond the ordinary, that tries to go beyond that which is observable, to reveal people's, in a sense, people's inner lives, right? So we don't stop at the surface level understanding. We try to think about the inner lives, and so yeah. So this is the sort of this is how we understand relevance of interpretive social science. What is the place of values then in interpretive social science? If you remember, in positivism, we say that there is a clear separation between fact and value, right? So who I am, what I'm feeling, what my sense of self is, all of that doesn't come into the picture when I'm looking at something in a positivist mode. In interpretivism, my very being as a researcher is sort of laden with values, and these values come into question, come into the research. So while positivism calls for a elimination of values when you're trying to do scientific research, in interpretivism, we fully acknowledge that our values do come into the picture. They are a part of the picture. And in fact, empathy and sharing in the socio-political values of the other are essential in order to understand the other. So I can only come up with multiple perspectives when I'm able to fit into the shoes of another, when I'm able to empathize. And this is something we have already stressed on several times. So at least temporarily, the interpretive social science researcher has to empathize with and share the socio-political values of the other. And so the position that the interpretive social science researcher has is one of relativism, which means that there is, of course, there is multiplicity of truths, but also that we cannot understand truth, nor knowledge, morality, value, unless we see them in relation to particular cultural context. So they have to be juxtaposed within a particular cultural context. They have to be seen in terms of the historical context, in terms of a historical trajectory. So the idea then is that fact, value, meaning, they're all fused into each other. And we don't make judgment calls on whether one single value is better than another, because we want to be able to discover this kind of multiplicity of perspective and understanding. So yeah, so this is as far as interpretivism is concerned. We can take 5 minutes to, if you have any questions, and then we can move to the next topic, which is critical social science. Do you have any questions? Let me try and send the slide. So I have shared on Moodle, I have shared the reading for this. That's going to be the main reading for your minor. That one and the ones I've already shared before, sociological imagination. But as I said earlier, the readings on sociological imagination will be used only to ask you reflective questions. Whereas this reading that I have now shared, which is on the approaches, that will be used for short answer questions and the MCQs. There will be no MCQs or short answers from the readings on sociological imagination. So you know that you have to read differently. You know, so for the first two, you just have to read to get a sense of what this means, what a sociological imagination means, what does it mean to apply it? Because most of the, if I ask a reflexive question, it'll be around it'll be more application, where you're trying to reflect on some contemporary thing or something from your own lives. It'll be worded that way. For the other one, they're sort of more straightforward. They're looking at your understanding of concepts. But again, they're not straightforward in the sense of I will not ask you to give me a definition. Especially the MCQs, they will also be analytical.
Ma'am, is it do I have to share the reading or you sharing the slide?
I'll share the slide with you now. I mean, for this critical social science, but the reading I've already shared. This 3 approaches reading I have already put on Impartus. Okay, okay, that worked. That's great. I just put it on the thing. Can you see if you can access it from there? On the chat channel?
Not yet, ma'am. I didn't get the message yet. It might take a few seconds. Just checking. Yeah, now I can see it. I'll be sharing it.
Yeah. So now all of you have it as well.
Ma'am, is the screen fine?
1 second. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the third approach we are discussing, we are looking at 2 now, and we can look at them together. This critical social science and then feminism, the feminist theory, where I'm using feminism or feminist social theory as the feminist perspective as an example of critical social science. So critical social science is one of the 3 major approaches, and you will see that it tries to address the criticisms of both positivism and interpretivism. So if one of the critiques of positivism is that it does not take into account subjective experience. And one of the critiques of interpretivism could be that it is too focused on the particular at the cost of arriving at a general a general understanding or any general statements. So what critical social science does is that it tries to sort of plug itself in the middle of these 2 approaches in some senses, and tries to address the concerns of or the problems associated with both these approaches. Now, the major emphasis of critical social science is to try and counter what they call surface level distortions So the idea is, and I'll just explain what this means. The idea is that whenever you, when you know that we are all part of situations which in some senses are distorted, but because we are part of them, we accept them. So, you know, when we do kinship, kinship and family, this is something that we'll discuss, but I can introduce it here. I think it's one of the easier examples to think about surface level distortions. When you think of the family, and I possibly we did talk about this already. When you think of the family is a space of love. But for critical social science, this idea of the family as just as a space of love and support can be a surface level distortion. So that when you observe me within the family, when we observe people within families, what we see is the support and the love. We don't see the conflicts that easily, right? So the surface level, so that we all participate in this surface level distortion of showing the family as a space of love, when it could well be the space of conflict, the space of power, the space of discrimination, and so on. So for critical social science, it's important to think about what these distortions are, possibly are in any social situation or social scene. So now, so then what it does is that it says that, okay, when you think of reality, it's not one reality. Critical social science tries to focus on multiple levels of reality. So it's the reality that I experience, and I'll come to the details of it, but it could be that it's the reality that I experience, the reality that the researcher experiences and sees. And so whatever is on the surface, so if in interpretivism, if I completely go with subjective experience, then I just understand that the family is a space of love, because, you know, that's what my informants or the people I'm studying will tell me. But if I begin to counter that level of reality, then I can uncover other things that are going on within the family. The other important, so the first is the emphasis on countering these surface level distortions. The second is that it espouses a certain kind of activism for human empowerment. So again, knowledge is not for knowledge. It's not just for the sake of knowledge. It is for the sake of human empowerment. So we try and understand what is going on so that we can empower. We try and understand those surface level distortions so that we can empower human beings, and so that we can address the inequalities, the discriminations of any particular social situation. Because it's trying to address the problems of positivism and interpretivism, it's a mix of the nomothetic and idiographic. Do you remember what nomothetic and idiographic is? Anybody? Nomothetic was a while back, but not idiographic. So positivism is nomothetic. What does that, does that give you any clues? No. So the in positivism, what you're trying to do is to arrive at general causal laws. So it's about you know, it's the that you are approaching any social fact in order to try and arrive at certain laws of causality, certain general laws. In idiographic, what are you doing? You are looking at individual cases, right? So it's the individual cases that are important for you in order to then use that to have a larger general understanding. So So what critical social science does is that it tries to combine both the particular and the arriving at general laws, as well as the focus on the individual experience. It tries to combine both these approaches. So it criticizes positivism for defending the status quo, for agreeing with whatever is and defending that, and it criticizes interpretive social science for being too subjective and too relativist, and also for treating people's ideas of things as more important than their material conditions. So it's my subjective experience which is much more important than the material conditions. So what you see is that critical social science tries to then have a sort of combination of these aspects. One of trying to arrive at certain general laws. Secondly, treating people's ideas and people's subjective experiences as important, but not at the cost of the material conditions of their lives. So the material conditions of people's lives are as important as what they experience subjectively, as important as what their understanding of their situation is. So it's what is called critical social science is a critical a process of inquiry. And here, when I say critical, again, it really means a certain kind of reflexivity, but that reflexivity is oriented towards human empowerment. That we want to study something, we want to understand something in order to be able to change it. So, so it's a process of inquiry that goes beyond these surface illusions. You understand that there are surface illusions and distortions in order to uncover the real structures in the material world. So we want to look at the material context of people's lives so that we can change these conditions, so that we can address the undesirable in these conditions and sort of create a more equal, humane society. Next slide, please. So then the purpose of conducting research in critical social science is not simply to study the social world, but to study it in order to change it. These are the key thinkers in for critical social science. And it's associated with these mainly these two theorists, the conflict theory and feminist analysis. What we are going to largely in this course, you're going to study some of the ideas of Karl Marx and not the others. We can just familiarize ourselves with the names, but that's about it for this course. So Karl Marx is considered to be a conflict theorist. And here I just want to say that here is a tradition in sociology which actually challenges the whole idea of looking at realities in terms of the order that it creates. So remember that we began by saying that what is important for the sociologist is how order is maintained, how order is produced, how it is maintained. For conflict theory, it's pretty much the opposite. So somebody like Karl Marx will say that that when you look at society, he says that society is really about class conflict. That fundamentally, most modern societies are really about the conflict between classes. And for him, he looks at this class conflict in terms of the conflict between two classes, what he calls the bourgeois and the proletariat. The bourgeois are the rich, the owners of the means of production, and the proletariat are the poor, the non-owners. So it's just on the basis of ownership of property that these two groups are created, and these two groups are in conflict with each other. So he thinks of society as a kind of reflection of this conflict between the haves and the have-nots. The second sort of theoretical line in with which critical social science is connected is feminist analysis. And again, here there is a conflict. There is a conflict between genders and the understanding that that the relationship between genders is not a relationship of difference. It is a relationship. It is a structured relationship of conflict. It is a structured relationship of discrimination. And we will come to that later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so so then these are the kinds of criticisms. I think I already mentioned this. These are the kinds of criticisms that critical social science has of the other approaches. It considers positivist social science to be too narrow and to not sort of focus on the humane aspects. It's non-humanist. It does not focus on the human aspect of social worlds. And interpretivism also has a similar critique of positivism. But critical social science also critiques interpretivism for being too constructivist and subjectivist and relativist. Interpretivist social science focuses on micro settings. It's really on sort of individual social worlds and small groups interactions. It is not able to then understand sort of the material and structural conditions of people's lives, and therefore not able to build sort of a broader, more general understanding of what is going on. And that's what critical social science is trying to do. Interpretive social science, according to CSS, is also amoral and passive because it does not take a value position. It says so. It says that the voice of the criminal is as important as the voice of the of the police, right? So so it does not take a very strong value position on whatever is going on. It tries to sort of present, because in its effort to present these multiple perspectives, it becomes difficult to take on a value position. So in relation to these and as a critique of this, we have CSS, which is trying to go beyond these surface illusions and uncover the structures in the material world. And it does this in order to be able to build a better world. Next slide. Okay, so clearly then the purpose of conducting research is to be able to address the inequalities in society, is to be able to identify what the sources of power and discrimination and inequality are, because only when you identify what the source is will you be able to think about how we can bring about a change. What was the reason for critique of, so the reason for, you mean, why are we criticizing PSS? What do you mean here, Harshit? Can we hear you, Harshit? No? So, mic not working. Okay. So what, I'm just going to interpret your question in the way that I think you're asking it. Why do we have these other perspectives? Why is positivist social science not good enough? So the thing is that, again, we must see this in the context of how the discipline develops. So when the discipline begins its journey, it begins it at a time when, as I said before, the natural sciences are already deeply entrenched and society is going through this kind of upheaval and turmoil. And there is a need to then, there is a felt need to think about studying society in order to understand it, in order to understand what's going on. So you have sociologists who then are really saying that a science of society is possible, right? Just like there is a science of the natural world, just like there is a science with which we understand naturally occurring phenomenon. Similarly, we can have certain methods of understanding socially occurring phenomenon. And that's how it begins. So positivism is sort of the first approach, the first sort of theoretical approach, theoretical methodological approach in doing this science of society. So it's modeled very closely along the lines of the natural sciences. You know, the whole idea of reality as being something that is objective and out there and so on. Now, as the discipline begins to develop, you have new theorists who are now saying that, okay, this need not necessarily work for our understanding of the social world, because what you're studying here are human beings. They're unpredictable, they have values, they're they're always in a situation, there's a lot of dynamism. The results of what we get from one group is not reproducible for another. So all these problems then come up in understanding human beings, in understanding human society. So there is a need then to say that, okay, positivism is not enough. It is just one of the perspectives. What we need are other perspectives. And when you look at sort of what has happened from the time of Auguste Comte's coining of the term sociology to now, there is, of course, there has been sort of several theoretical directions, several approaches which have come up. What was the reason for critiquing PSS? The reason for critiquing PSS is that is the development of this understanding that society cannot be studied in the same way as the natural world is studied. That society should not be studied in only with only a particular approach. That there can be multiple approaches when we're trying to understand the problems of society. Does that address your question, Harshit? Or if you're asking something else, if I haven't understood your question, maybe you can write it again, try and frame it differently. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, so then the purpose, as I said, of conducting research is to really arrive at a clear understanding of the social world, because we want to transform social relations. We want to transform those social relations that are unequal, that are discriminatory, and so on. So knowledge is what will become the source of empowerment. Knowledge will become the source of empowerment. It is through the social scientists. So the social scientists will actually, because when we inhabit a social scene, we don't necessarily think of it or know it to be a source of, to be a space for this kind of discrimination. We may not, discrimination and inequality. So it is the knowledge that empowers the individuals who are part of that social scene to then try and change it. So the focus then when we conduct research with a critical social science perspective is always on the marginalized and the less powerful. So because we're trying to transform the social world, this transformation is for whom? This notion of equality is for whom? It's really for those who don't have it, right? So we don't address those who are in situations of power through this research. We address those who are in situations of power, but we only do so to understand them, because ultimately the focus has to be on the experience of the marginalized. Okay, I will stop here today and carry on with the rest of critical social science in the next class. Please start reading the reading that I've shared, because then if you have questions, we can address them in class, and it'll be good to do that. We can, I don't know, Chanel, have we figured out whether we can do a poll here? It's possible, right? You had done it.
Oh. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
I should stop presenting. Yes, ma'am. Should I just make a poll on the minor evaluation?
Let me just, I have to just check once what the total marks are. I don't remember it. Do you remember it offhand?
No, ma'am.
Yeah.
I check
So
it.
let's do it in the next class. In the next class, we can do that, right? We can just think about how to divide the three segments in the paper. Okay. Do you have any questions for what we've covered today? Please read and come, so you do have some questions if you read. Yeah. So I have shared some material for the tute today. Those of you who have the tute today, please look at some of that and then come for the tute. All right. I'll see you in class on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Take care.